The morning sun cast long shadows across the Fort Harrison rifle range as Corporal Elena Voss stepped up to firing position 7. Her boots crunched against the gravel, each step deliberate yet somehow uncertain. The other recruits had already claimed their preferred spots, leaving her with the station closest to the range officer's tower, where Sergeant Major Frank Kellerman watched every move through his binoculars. Elena adjusted the standard-issue M4 carbine against her shoulder, feeling its familiar weight despite her carefully practiced fumbling with the safety mechanism. Around her, the confident chatter of her fellow recruits filled the crisp morning air. They had been training together for 6 weeks now, and she had deliberately cultivated a reputation as the squad's weakest link. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed similar military training in your area, or have family who served. Sergeant Major Kellerman's voice boomed across the range through his megaphone. Begin your shooting sequence. Weapons hot. The command echoed off the surrounding hills as 20 rifles came to life in a symphony of controlled chaos. Elena squinted through her scope, allowing her crosshairs to waver slightly as she aimed at the target 200 meters downrange. Her breathing was steady, professional, but she forced a slight tremor into her hands as she squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, striking the outer ring of the target with a metallic ping that seemed to announce her failure to everyone present. "Voss, what the hell was that?" Kellerman barked from his elevated position. "My grandmother could shoot better with her eyes closed and arthritis in both hands." The other recruits snickered, their own shots clustering nicely in the center rings of their targets. Private Marcus Chun, who had emerged as the unofficial leader of their group, shook his head in mock disappointment. Elena caught his gesture in her peripheral vision and allowed a flush of embarrassment to color her cheeks. She fired 4 more rounds, each one carefully placed to suggest incompetence rather than reveal her true capabilities. 2 missed the target entirely, sailing harmlessly into the backstop behind the range. The remaining shots found the outer edges of the scoring rings, barely qualifying as hits. Around her, the other recruits were finishing their sequences with the satisfying precision of well-trained soldiers. The sharp crack of their rifles contrasted sharply with her own scattered performance, creating a rhythm that seemed to emphasize her apparent inadequacy. Kellerman climbed down from his tower, his heavy boots striking each metal step with authority. He approached Elena's position with the measured stride of a man who had seen every type of failure the military could produce. His weathered face bore the expression of someone reaching the limits of his patience. "Corporal Voss," he said, his voice lower now, but no less intimidating. "In 32 years of military service, I have never encountered such a complete waste of ammunition and training resources. You are absolutely useless with that weapon." Elena maintained her carefully constructed facade of shame, lowering her eyes to study the worn wood of her rifle stock. Inside, she felt the familiar tension of maintaining her cover, the constant awareness that her true identity remained buried beneath layers of classified paperwork and operational necessity. The mess hall buzzed with the usual evening chatter as Elena carried her tray to an empty corner table. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the institutional green walls, and the smell of overcooked vegetables mixed with disinfectant created an atmosphere that perfectly matched her supposed mood of defeat. She had barely settled into her seat when Private Chun approached with 3 other recruits in tow. His confident swagger had only grown stronger since the morning's range session, and Elena could see the predatory gleam in his eyes that suggested he smelled weakness. "Well, if it isn't Annie Oakley," Chun announced loudly enough for half the mess hall to hear. "How many targets did you actually hit today, Voss? Was it 0 or just close to 0? Private Rebecca Torres, a sharp-featured woman from Texas with an impressive service record, laughed as she slid into the seat across from Elena. "I counted 2 hits out of 20 shots," she said with mock sympathy. "That's like a 10% success rate. My little brother could do better with a BB gun." Elena forced herself to look uncomfortable, shifting in her seat as if their words genuinely stung. In reality, She was calculating angles and distances throughout the mess hall, an old habit from her previous life that she couldn't entirely suppress. The large windows facing west would provide excellent natural light for precision work, while the eastern wall offered multiple concealment options. Private Jake Morrison, a stocky recruit from Montana, leaned against the table with his arms crossed. "You know what I heard?" he said with a grin that revealed uneven teeth. "I heard Kellerman is already talking about recycling you back to basic training. Apparently you're the worst shooter he's seen in his entire career." The conversation around nearby tables had quieted, and Elena could feel the attention of other recruits focusing on their group. This public humiliation was exactly what she had expected, but it still required careful management to maintain her cover without appearing completely pathetic. "Maybe the military just isn't for everyone," Torres added with false kindness. "There's no shame in finding a different career path. Maybe something that doesn't involve, actually hitting what you're aiming at." Elena picked at her meatloaf, allowing her shoulders to slump slightly as if the weight of their criticism was genuinely affecting her confidence. She had perfected this posture over months of careful practice, creating the image of someone slowly being crushed by repeated failure. The truth was far different. 3 years ago, she had been operating in classified theaters where a single missed shot could compromise entire missions and cost lives. Her service record, buried deep within Pentagon archives, told a different story entirely. 47 confirmed eliminations at ranges exceeding 800 meters. Successful operations in environments where even seasoned snipers failed. But those accomplishments belong to someone else now, someone with a different name and a different life. Elena Voss was supposed to be exactly what these recruits saw, a struggling soldier who couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. Chun sat down heavily beside Morrison, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for Elena to hear. "I'm telling you guys, she's going to wash out before the month is over. Kellerman won't tolerate this level of incompetence much longer. She's making the rest of us look bad." Morrison agreed. "When we graduate and get our assignments, people are going to remember that we trained with a woman who couldn't qualify on basic marksmanship." Elena stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor with a harsh sound that punctuated the conversation. She left her half-eaten meal on the table and walked toward the exit with what appeared to be wounded dignity, but was actually careful calculation. As she reached the door, she heard Torres call after her in a voice dripping with false concern. "Don't take it personally, Voss. We're just trying to help you see reality." The evening air outside the mess hall was cool against Elena's face, and she allowed herself a moment to drop the facade of defeat. Her real challenge wasn't hitting targets or managing weapons. Her real challenge was maintaining this elaborate deception while surrounded by people who had no idea they were judging someone whose skills exceeded their comprehension. The following morning brought another round of marksmanship training, and Elena could hear the whispered conversations before she even entered the equipment shed. The other recruits had gathered around Chun, who was holding court with the confidence of someone who had appointed himself the squad's unofficial spokesperson. "Deadweight Voss strikes again," Chun announced as Elena approached her assigned locker. "That's what we're calling you now, by the way. Deadweight. It fits perfectly since you're dragging down our entire unit's performance statistics." Torres nodded enthusiastically from her position near the rifle racks. "I heard from my friend in Alpha Company that their worst shooter still qualified expert level compared to your scores. You're literally setting new records for incompetence." Elena methodically gathered her equipment, checking each piece with the thoroughness that had been drilled into her during years of specialized training. Her movements appeared clumsy to the watching recruits, but every gesture was calculated to maintain her cover while ensuring her weapon would function flawlessly when needed. Morrison emerged from behind a stack of ammunition boxes, his face lit up with malicious glee. "I've got an idea," he said loudly. "Why don't we start a betting pool on how many shots Deadweight will miss today? I'm putting my money on complete failure across all 20 rounds." The suggestion sparked immediate interest among the group, and Elena watched as several recruits began discussing odds and wagering their weekly canteen privileges. The casual cruelty of their entertainment didn't surprise her, but it reinforced the importance of maintaining her carefully constructed facade. Sergeant Major Kellerman's voice cut through their chatter like a blade through silk. Formation in 5 minutes. Anyone not ready gets to explain their tardiness to Colonel Martinez personally. The recruits scrambled to complete their preparations, but Elena noticed that Sean made a point of bumping into her shoulder as he passed. The contact was deliberately rough, designed to throw off her balance and add to her appearance of clumsiness. "You know what, dead weight," Chun said with a smirk that revealed his enjoyment of the situation. "Maybe you should just save everyone time and quit now. There's no shame in admitting you're not cut out for real military service." Elena allowed the comment to hang in the air as she slung her rifle over her shoulder. In her previous life, Chin's attitude would have earned him a swift lesson in respect and combat effectiveness. But that version of herself belonged to classified operations and sealed records that these recruits would never have clearance to access. The walk to the firing line felt longer than usual, with whispered comments and barely suppressed laughter following her every step. She had become the unit's primary source of entertainment, a role that required constant vigilance to maintain without crossing into complete humiliation. Torres fell in a step beside her, her voice adopting the false sympathy that Elena had come to recognize as particularly dangerous. "You know, Voss, I've been thinking about your situation. Maybe you're trying too hard. Sometimes when people are completely hopeless at something, they just need to accept their limitations." Elena nodded as if considering this advice seriously, while internally calculating the precise angle and windage corrections that would be needed to place a shot through the center of the target at their current training distance. Her muscle memory contained thousands of similar calculations, each one executed under conditions far more challenging than this controlled training environment. At the firing line, Kellerman had positioned himself directly behind Elena's station, his clipboard ready to document what he clearly expected to be another disaster. His presence drew additional attention from the other recruits, who positioned themselves for optimal viewing of her anticipated failure. "Today we're shooting at 300 meters, Kellerman announced. Extended range qualification. Miss more than 5 shots, and you're looking at remedial training that will extend your time here by 6 weeks. Elena felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with precision shooting, but she forced herself to display nervousness instead. Her hands developed a carefully practiced tremor as she settled into her firing position, and she allowed her breathing to become slightly irregular, as if anxiety was affecting her performance. The first shot was another calculated miss, striking the outer edge of the target with just enough accuracy to suggest she was trying but failing. Around her, the other recruits were finding their rhythm, their shots grouping nicely in the center rings while hers scattered across the outer zones like random accidents. Kellerman's disgust was palpable as he marked her scorecard with increasingly harsh strokes of his pen. Each missed shot seemed to deepen his conviction that Elena represented everything wrong with modern military training standards. The formal warning came on a Thursday afternoon when the autumn air carried the scent of burning leaves across Fort Harrison's training grounds. Elena sat across from Sergeant Major Kellerman in his cramped office, surrounded by decades of military memorabilia and commendation certificates that spoke to his distinguished career. "Corporal Voss," Kellerman began, his voice carrying the weight of official disappointment. "Your performance over the past 7 weeks has been consistently substandard. You are currently failing to meet minimum qualification standards in marksmanship, and your scores are dragging down your entire unit's evaluation metrics." Elena maintained her carefully practiced expression of shame and determination, nodding as if accepting responsibility for genuine failure. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being lectured on marksmanship by someone whose best recorded shot was probably inferior to her worst deliberate miss. "I understand your concern, Sergeant Major," she replied with the appropriate mix of respect and dejection. "I've been practicing extra hours on the range, but I just can't seem to improve my accuracy." Kellerman leaned forward, his weathered hands clasped on the desk between them. "Extra practice isn't enough when the fundamental skills are this deficient. I'm recommending you for immediate remedial training, which will extend your time here by 8 weeks minimum. If you fail to show significant improvement during that period, you'll be recycled back to basic training. The weight of his words settled in the small office like a physical presence. Elena had expected this development, but maintaining her cover required her to react as if the news was devastating to her carefully constructed aspirations. Outside the office window, she could see her fellow recruits conducting afternoon physical training. Chun was leading a group through combat drills, his natural leadership abilities on full display. He had no idea that the woman he called deadweight had commanded similar exercises in theaters where failure meant death rather than simply embarrassment. There is one alternative, Kellerman continued, his tone suggesting he was offering charity rather than opportunity. Colonel Martinez has authorized a final qualification test next Monday. It's designed for expert-level marksmen, but if you can somehow manage to pass it, your previous failures will be overlooked. Elena looked up with what appeared to be desperate hope. What would I need to achieve, Sergeant Major? Expert-level qualification at 500 meters, multiple target engagement, time-pressure scenarios, and wind compensation calculations, Kellerman replied. Frankly, given your current skill level, I consider it impossible. But the opportunity exists if you want to attempt it. The challenge he described was actually well within Elena's capabilities, even accounting for the need to make her success appear like a miraculous improvement rather than a revelation of hidden expertise. The real difficulty would be calibrating her performance to seem believable while still meeting the qualification standards. I'd like to try, sir, Elena said with the earnestness of someone grasping at a final chance. I know my performance has been disappointing, but I believe I can improve with focused effort. Kellerman's expression suggested he viewed her optimism as further evidence of her delusion. Very well, Corporal. Monday morning, 0800 hours. Don't expect any accommodations or second chances. This test will be administered under combat simulation conditions with live observers from the training command. As Elena left his office, she passed a bulletin board covered with photographs of distinguished graduates from previous training cycles. Their confident faces seemed to mock her current predicament, but she knew that none of them had operated under the constraints that governed her every action. The walk back to the barracks took her past the advanced training facilities where specialized units conducted their exercises. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to operate openly, without the constant burden of concealing her true capabilities. But that luxury belonged to her previous life, before circumstances had forced her into this elaborate charade. Now, she was Elena Voss, struggling recruit and apparent failure, preparing for a test that would either maintain her cover or potentially expose everything she had worked to conceal. The evening air carried the distant sound of gunfire from the advanced ranges, where real marksmen practiced their craft without the need for deception. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for Monday's test, walking the razor's edge between success and exposure, between maintaining her cover and revealing the skills that defined her true identity. In 3 days, everything would change, though none of her tormentors could imagine how completely their understanding of deadweight Voss was about to be shattered. Word of Elena's final qualification test spread through the barracks like wildfire, transforming her from mere entertainment into the centerpiece of what the recruits were calling the event of the century. By Friday evening, the betting pool had expanded beyond their unit to include recruits from 3 other companies. Chun had positioned himself as the unofficial bookmaker, accepting wagers with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome was predetermined. His notebook filled with entries as soldier after soldier placed their bets against Elena's success. $20, says deadweight, doesn't even hit the target backing, announced Private Rodriguez from Bravo Company, slapping a crumpled bill onto Chin's growing pile of money. I've heard about her shooting. My money's on complete disaster. Torres leaned against her bunk, counting coins with theatrical precision. I'm betting she quits halfway through when she realizes how impossible it is. Expert qualification at 500 meters. That's like asking a blind person to thread a needle. Elena sat on her own bunk, methodically cleaning her rifle with movements that appeared nervous and uncertain to her watching audience. In reality, she was performing maintenance procedures that had been burned into her muscle memory through years of specialized training, but she allowed her hands to shake slightly as if anxiety was affecting her motor control. Morrison wandered over with his usual swagger, his voice carrying the authority of someone who considered himself an expert on military matters. "You know what the really sad part is?" he said loudly enough for the entire barracks to hear. "She actually thinks she has a chance. Look at her over there, cleaning her weapon like it's going to make a difference." The other recruits laughed appreciatively at his observation, and Elena forced herself to appear self-conscious under their scrutiny. She had learned to use their mockery as cover for her preparations, letting their attention focus on her apparent nervousness while she conducted the real business of equipment inspection. Private Hassan from Charlie Company approached with curiosity written across his features. "I heard Kellerman designed this test specifically to be impossible for someone at her skill level. 500-meter shots with wind compensation and multiple target engagement. That's advanced marksman stuff." Elena's ears picked up details about the test parameters that Kellerman hadn't shared during their meeting. Multiple targets suggested a combat simulation scenario, while wind compensation indicated outdoor conditions that would add complexity to every shot. These were exactly the conditions where her real training would provide the greatest advantage. Chun closed his notebook with a satisfied snap, his face glowing with the pleasure of someone who had orchestrated profitable entertainment. "Final tally," he announced. 43 bets against dead weight passing, 0 bets in her favor. Total pot is $237. The mathematical certainty of her expected failure should have been demoralizing, but Elena found it oddly liberating. Their complete confidence in her incompetence provided perfect cover for what was about to happen on Monday morning. Torres approached Elena's bunk with an expression of exaggerated sympathy. "You know, Voss, there's still time to withdraw from this test. Save yourself the public humiliation. Maybe tell Kellerman you've reconsidered and want to accept the remedial training instead." Elena looked up from her rifle maintenance with what appeared to be stubborn determination mixed with fear. "I have to try," she said with the quaver of someone trying to convince themselves as much as others. "Maybe I'll get lucky." The suggestion that luck might play a role in expert-level marksmanship drew renewed laughter from the assembled recruits. They had no understanding of the thousands of hours of training that went into developing the muscle memory and mental discipline required for precision shooting under pressure. Morrison shook his head with mock pity. "Luck isn't going to help you calculate windage at 500 meters dead weight. That requires actual skill and knowledge that you clearly don't possess." As the evening wore on, Elena listened to increasingly detailed speculation about her impending failure. The recruits dissected every aspect of the test, explaining to each other why each element would be impossible for someone of her apparent skill level. Their analysis was actually quite accurate, which made their complete misunderstanding of her true capabilities all the more ironic. The lights-out call came at 2200 hours, but Elena could hear whispered conversations continuing long into the night. Her fellow recruits were too excited about Monday's entertainment to settle into immediate sleep. She lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and listening to the soft sounds of a barracks full of soldiers who had no idea they were about to witness something that would fundamentally change their understanding of the woman they called deadweight. Monday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of autumn day that made long-range shooting both beautiful and treacherous. Elena woke before reveille, her internal clock calibrated by years of pre-dawn operations where timing meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The advanced range at Fort Harrison stretched beyond the standard training facilities, extending into natural terrain that included elevation changes, wind corridors, and environmental obstacles designed to test the most skilled marksmen. Elena had studied the layout during her supposedly remedial practice sessions, noting sight lines and calculating atmospheric conditions with the precision that had once made her invaluable to classified operations. By 0730, Word had spread throughout the base about the morning's entertainment. Recruits from multiple companies gathered along the observation areas, their excited chatter creating an atmosphere more suited to a sporting event than a military qualification test. Chen had arrived early to secure premium viewing positions for his betting pool participants, his notebook ready to document what he expected to be the most spectacular failure in Fort Harrison's recent history. The morning sun caught the gleam of satisfaction in his eyes as he surveyed the assembled crowd. "Look at this turnout," Torres said with obvious delight. "Half the base wants to watch deadweight crash and burn. This is going to be legendary." Elena approached the equipment shed with carefully practiced nervousness, her movements suggesting someone fighting internal panic while trying to maintain dignity. She collected her assigned rifle, a standard M24 sniper weapon system that felt familiar in her hands despite her apparent unfamiliarity with its operation. Morrison had positioned himself near the firing line, his voice carrying across the range as he provided commentary for the gathering crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced with theatrical flair, "prepare to witness the most educational demonstration of what not to do with a precision rifle." Sergeant Major Kellerman emerged from the range control tower wearing his dress uniform, a choice that suggested he expected this event to be memorable for reasons beyond Elena's anticipated failure. Colonel Martinez accompanied him, along with two other officers whose presence indicated this test had attracted official attention. The target array stretched across 500 meters of varied terrain, with steel silhouettes positioned at different elevations and angles. Wind flags scattered throughout the range showed complex air currents that would challenge even experienced marksmen. Elena assessed the conditions with the automatic expertise of someone who had operated in far more difficult environments. "Corporal Voss," Kellerman announced through his megaphone, his voice carrying across the range to the assembled observers. "You have exactly 15 minutes to engage 12 targets at ranges from 300 to 600 meters. Wind conditions are variable, and each target must be struck in the vital zone to count as qualified hits." The silence that followed his announcement was filled with anticipation and barely suppressed amusement. Elena could hear whispered conversations speculating about how many shots she would miss and whether she would even attempt to complete the full course. She settled into firing position with movements that appeared clumsy to the watching crowd, but actually represented the systematic preparation of a professional sniper assuming a stable shooting platform. Her breathing became controlled, her heart rate dropped to the optimal range for precision shooting, and her vision focused with the clarity that came from years of training. The first target sat at 400 meters, a steel silhouette that required precise wind compensation due to a crosswind that had been invisible to casual observation but was clearly marked by her analysis of the vegetation movement throughout the range. Elena allowed herself one moment of genuine nervousness, not about her ability to hit the targets, but about the careful balance she would need to maintain. Too much success would raise questions about her previous failures, while too little would mean genuine failure and the end of her mission. The watching crowd fell silent as she settled behind her rifle, their excitement focused on what they expected to be immediate and spectacular failure. Kellerman raised a stopwatch, ready to document 15 minutes of embarrassment that would become Fort Harrison legend. "Time begins now," he called out, starting the clock that would either maintain Elena's carefully constructed cover or begin the process of revealing skills that were never supposed to see daylight in a training environment. Elena's first shot rang out across the morning stillness with a sharp crack that seemed to freeze the assembled crowd in place. The sound echoed off the surrounding hills before fading into silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity. Through his binoculars, Kellerman searched the first target at 400 meters. "Hit," he announced with unmistakable surprise, coloring his voice. "Center mass on target 1. The observers shifted restlessly, their confident expectations suddenly confronted with an outcome that didn't match their certainty. Chun consulted his notebook as if the written odds might somehow explain this unexpected development. Elena cycled the bolt with mechanical precision, her movements becoming smoother as she allowed some of her true training to surface. The second target required a significant elevation adjustment and compensation for a tricky wind pattern that was funneling through a gap in a nearby ridgeline. The second shot followed quickly, and again Kellerman's voice carried across the range with growing bewilderment. Target 2, center hit. Time remaining 13 minutes, 20 seconds. Torres grabbed Morrison's arm, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. This isn't right. She can't be hitting these shots. There has to be some kind of mistake. But Elena was already engaging the third target, a steel silhouette positioned at the maximum range of 600 meters. This shot required not only perfect wind calculation, but compensation for the Coriolis effect and the precise atmospheric conditions that affected bullet trajectory at extended distances. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and she instinctively knew the shot was perfect before Kellerman could confirm it through his optics. Her muscle memory had taken over, years of specialized training overriding the careful facade she had maintained for months. Target 3, direct hit, Kellerman called out, his professional composure beginning to crack. The disbelief in his voice was audible to everyone present. The crowd of observers had fallen completely silent now, their earlier amusement replaced by confusion and growing amazement. Elena could feel their attention intensifying as she demonstrated skills that contradicted everything they thought they knew about her capabilities. Target 4 was positioned at an unusual angle, requiring her to account for both wind drift and the geometric challenges of engaging a target that wasn't directly downrange. She adjusted her scope with movements that were becoming increasingly fluid and professional. The fourth shot produced another metallic ring as the bullet found its mark with surgical precision. Elena was now 4 for 4, maintaining a perfect score on a test that the assembled recruits had considered impossible for someone of her apparent skill level. Chen's notebook trembled in his hands as he watched his carefully calculated betting odds dissolve into mathematical impossibility. The money that had seemed so certain to be his was now looking like a catastrophic miscalculation based on fundamentally flawed assumptions. Colonel Martinez leaned toward Kellerman, his voice low but audible to those standing nearby. Sergeant Major, what exactly do we know about Corporal Voss's background? Her service record prior to arriving at Fort Harrison. Kellerman's face had gone pale as he watched Elena engage the fifth target with the smooth efficiency of a seasoned professional. Standard transfer from administrative duties, sir. Nothing in her file indicated any specialized training or marksmanship experience. The fifth shot rang out with the same devastating accuracy as the previous 4. Elena was systematically destroying targets that should have been beyond her capabilities. Each hit delivered with a precision that spoke to training far beyond anything available in standard military programs. Morrison's voice cracked as he tried to process what he was witnessing. This is impossible, he said to no one in particular. Dead weight can't shoot like this. She missed everything last week. But Elena was already transitioning to target 6, her movements flowing with the practiced ease of someone who had performed similar operations under conditions far more stressful than a training range filled with amazed observers. The careful facade was crumbling as her true abilities demanded expression. Target 6 fell to another perfect shot, followed immediately by her engagement of Target 7. She was moving through the course with increasing speed now, each shot delivered with mechanical precision that left no doubt about her genuine skill level. The silence from the observation area was broken only by the rhythmic crack of her rifle and the metallic confirmation of each successful hit. Every shot was finding its mark with an accuracy that transformed the morning's entertainment into something approaching a demonstration of military excellence that none of them had expected to witness. Target 8 required Elena to engage a steel silhouette partially concealed behind natural cover, visible only as a narrow profile at 550 meters. The shot demanded not only perfect accuracy, but the ability to identify and exploit a target window that measured less than 6 inches across. She adjusted her position with fluid precision, her body settling into the classic sniper stance with movements that revealed years of specialized training. The careful clumsiness that had defined her previous performances was gone, replaced by the economical efficiency of a true professional. The eighth shot cracked across the range with authority, and the distant ring of metal confirmed another perfect hit. Elena was now 8 for 8, maintaining a score that should have been impossible for someone who had struggled to hit stationary targets at basic training distances. Kellerman lowered his binoculars, his weathered features displaying confusion that bordered on distress. "Colonel Martinez," he said quietly, "I think we may have a situation here that requires immediate investigation." The colonel nodded grimly, his eyes never leaving Elena as she prepared for the ninth engagement. Her movements had transformed completely, displaying the kind of muscle memory that came only from extensive specialized training under combat conditions. Target 9 was positioned at the course's most challenging location, requiring her to shoot across a wind gap where multiple air currents created unpredictable bullet drift patterns. Elena studied the vegetation indicators throughout the range, reading wind conditions with the expertise of someone who had made similar calculations under fire. She squeezed the trigger with perfect follow-through, and the ninth target rang with the same metallic confirmation that had marked every previous shot. The crowd of observers had moved beyond amazement into something approaching awe mixed with genuine confusion. Chen's betting notebook lay forgotten at his feet, its carefully calculated odds rendered meaningless by a demonstration of skill that contradicted every assumption they had made about Elena's capabilities. His face showed the particular distress of someone whose certainty about the world had been fundamentally shaken. Torres grabbed Hassan's arm, her voice barely above a whisper. "How is this possible? She couldn't hit anything last week. She was the worst shooter in the entire company." Elena was already transitioning to target 10, her scope adjustments becoming increasingly rapid as she settled into the rhythm that had once made her invaluable in classified operations. Each movement spoke to training that went far beyond anything available in standard military programs. The 10th shot rang out with the same devastating precision, followed immediately by her engagement of the 11th target. She was moving through the final stages of the course with mechanical efficiency that left no doubt about her genuine capabilities. Morrison's voice carried across the observation area with the hollow tone of someone whose understanding of reality had been completely overturned. "This isn't the same person who was training with us. This is someone else entirely." Colonel Martinez stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had begun to suspect they were witnessing something with implications far beyond a simple training exercise. "Sergeant Major Kellerman, I want Corporal Voss's complete service record pulled immediately. Every document, every transfer order, every piece of paperwork associated with her assignment to this facility." Elena heard the colonel's words, but maintained her focus on the final target. A steel silhouette positioned at maximum range with partial concealment that created the most demanding shot of the entire course. This target required not only perfect technical execution, but the kind of mental discipline that came only from operating under life-or-death pressure. She settled behind her rifle for the final time, her breathing controlled and her heart rate optimal for precision shooting. The assembled observers watched in complete silence as she prepared to complete a performance that had already shattered every assumption they had made about her identity and capabilities. The wind indicators showed a complex pattern that would challenge even the most experienced marksman, but Elena read the conditions with the automatic expertise of someone who had operated in environments where a single missed shot could compromise entire missions and cost lives. The final shot was moments away, and with it the completion of a demonstration that would force everyone present to confront the reality that Deadweight Voss was someone entirely different from the struggling recruit they thought they knew. The final shot rang out with the sharp authority that had marked every previous engagement, followed by the distant metallic confirmation that Elena had achieved what should have been impossible. 12 targets, 12 hits, perfect score under expert-level conditions that have been designed to challenge the most skilled marksmen in the military. Kellerman stood frozen behind his binoculars, the stopwatch in his other hand showing 11 minutes and 47 seconds. Elena had not only passed the test, but completed it with time to spare and accuracy that exceeded the performance standards of instructors with decades of experience. Perfect score, Kellerman announced, his voice carrying across the range with the hollow tone of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had been shattered. 12 for 12 hits, all within the vital zone. Time remaining 3 minutes, 13 seconds. The silence that followed his announcement stretched across the range like a physical presence. 200 assembled observers stood motionless, their minds struggling to reconcile what they had just witnessed with everything they thought they knew about the woman they had called deadweight. Elena rose from her firing position with movements that now revealed the fluid grace of a trained professional. The careful clumsiness that had defined her previous performances was gone completely, replaced by the economical efficiency of someone whose body had been honed by years of specialized training. Colonel Martinez stepped forward, his face displaying the grim expression of someone who had begun to understand they were dealing with a situation that extended far beyond a simple training exercise. His voice carried the authority of a field-grade officer confronting what might be a significant security concern. "Sergeant Major, secure that weapon and escort Corporal Voss to the command center immediately. I want her isolated until we can determine exactly who we're dealing with here." Chen's notebook lay abandoned in the dirt, its pages scattered by the morning breeze like the remnants of assumptions that had been proven catastrophically wrong. His face showed the particular shock of someone whose certainty about the world had been completely overturned in the space of 12 rifle shots. Torres grabbed Morrison's arm, her voice barely controlled as she struggled to process what she had witnessed. "That's not possible. She missed everything last week. She couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. This has to be some kind of mistake." But there was no mistake in the precision Elena had displayed, no accident in the systematic destruction of targets that should have challenged marksmen with years of advanced training. Every shot had been delivered with the mechanical perfection of someone whose muscle memory contained thousands of similar calculations executed under far more demanding conditions. Hassan stepped closer to the firing line, his voice filled with the awe of someone who recognized exceptional skill when he witnessed it. Those weren't lucky shots. That was professional-level marksmanship, military sniper-level precision. Elena shouldered her rifle with the practiced ease that had been absent from all her previous training exercises, her movements flowing with the natural grace of someone whose body understood weapons as extensions of their own capabilities rather than awkward tools to be mastered. As Kellerman approached to escort her from the range, Elena allowed herself one moment to survey the faces of her fellow recruits. The mockery and contempt that had defined their expressions for months had been replaced by confusion, amazement, and the dawning realization that they had been completely wrong about everything. Private Rodriguez from Bravo Company spoke for the assembled crowd when he voiced what everyone was thinking. Who the hell is she really? Deadweight Voss doesn't exist. That woman is a trained killer. The whispered conversations that erupted throughout the observation area carried the urgent tone of people trying to process information that contradicted everything they thought they understood. Elena had not simply passed the test. She had demonstrated capabilities that suggested training and experience far beyond anything available in conventional military programs. Colonel Martinez fell in a step beside Kellerman as they prepared to escort Elena to the command center. His voice was low but carried the urgency of someone who suspected they were dealing with classified implications. "Give me her complete file, every transfer document, every piece of paperwork associated with her assignment here. And contact the Pentagon Personnel Office immediately. I want to know who authorized her placement in this training program and under whose authority she's operating." Elena walked between her escorts with the calm composure of someone whose long-maintained cover had finally been blown. The relief of no longer hiding her capabilities mixed with concern about the operational implications of her exposure. Behind them, the gathered recruits continued their urgent discussions, trying to understand how someone they had dismissed as completely incompetent could demonstrate skills that exceeded those of their instructors. The morning's entertainment had become something far more significant, a revelation that would force everyone present to question their assumptions about identity, capability, and the true nature of the woman they had so completely misunderstood. The secure conference room in Fort Harrison's command center felt smaller than usual as Colonel Martinez spread Elena's classified personnel files across the polished oak table. The documents bore the distinctive red striping that marked them as containing information requiring special handling clearances that most of the base personnel would never possess. Elena sat quietly in the center chair, her hands folded calmly in her lap as she watched 3 field-grade officers and a Pentagon liaison digest the contents of records that told a very different story than the one her fellow recruits had believed for months. Colonel Martinez looked up from the documents with an expression that mixed professional respect with the particular frustration of someone who realized they had been operating without crucial information. Staff Sergeant Elena Catherine Reyes, he read from the top document. Not Corporal Elena Voss, as we've known you. The Pentagon liaison, a stern woman in civilian clothes who had introduced herself only as Ms. Davidson, leaned forward with the intensity of someone accustomed to dealing with classified operations. Staff Sergeant Reyes has been operating under deep cover as part of Operation Silent Thunder, a program designed to identify and eliminate security vulnerabilities in our training systems. Kellerman shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his weathered features showing the distress of someone whose professional judgment had been completely undermined. The service record showed 47 confirmed eliminations at ranges exceeding 800 meters, successful operations in classified theaters, and specialized training that placed her among the military's most elite marksmen. Your performance this morning wasn't an improvement, Ms. Davidson continued, addressing Elena directly. It was a controlled revelation of capabilities that have been deliberately concealed for operational purposes. The question now is whether your cover has been so thoroughly compromised that the mission parameters need to be revised. Elena spoke for the first time since entering the room, her voice carrying the calm authority that had been absent from her carefully constructed persona as the struggling recruit. The mission objectives have been achieved. We've identified multiple security vulnerabilities in personnel evaluation, training protocols, and information security that pose significant risks to operational effectiveness. Major Thompson, the base training commander, consulted his own set of documents with growing concern. According to this assessment, our entire marksmanship program has been operating under assumptions that could be exploited by hostile intelligence services. The ease with which you maintained your cover suggests systematic weaknesses in our evaluation processes. The implications were staggering. Elena's months of deliberately poor performance had revealed that instructors and fellow recruits accepted surface-level assessments without conducting the deeper investigations that might have uncovered discrepancies in her background or capabilities. Kellerman's voice carried the hollow tone of someone whose professional confidence had been shattered. In 32 years of military service, I never questioned the authenticity of a recruit's struggles. Your performance was so convincingly poor that I recommended remedial training without ever considering the possibility of deception. Elena nodded with understanding rather than judgment. That was exactly the vulnerability the operation was designed to identify. Enemy agents with specialized training could potentially infiltrate our systems using similar deception techniques, remaining undetected while gathering intelligence or positioning themselves for sabotage operations. Ms. Davidson made notes on her tablet with the efficiency of someone documenting information that would be included in classified reports to senior Pentagon officials. The broader implications extend beyond training programs to questions about personnel security, background investigations, and the assumptions we make about individual capabilities based on observed performance. Colonel Martinez closed the personnel files with the finality of someone who understood that the morning's events would require comprehensive policy reviews and procedural changes throughout the training command. The question now is how we handle the immediate situation with the other recruits who witnessed your demonstration. Elena had been considering the same question since her perfect performance had blown her carefully maintained cover. The operational security implications were significant, but the educational value of the exposure might outweigh the risks if handled properly. The gathered officers represented different aspects of the military bureaucracy that would need to process and respond to the morning's revelations. Each would return to their respective commands with information that would influence policies and procedures affecting thousands of personnel. Outside the conference room, Elena knew that her fellow recruits were still struggling to understand what they had witnessed. Their assumptions about deadweight Voss had been so completely overturned that many would probably question their ability to accurately assess anyone's capabilities in the future. The transformation from mockery to respect would be dramatic, but the deeper lesson about the dangers of superficial judgments would hopefully extend far beyond their immediate unit to influence how they approach personnel evaluation throughout their military careers. The afternoon formation assembled with unusual tension crackling through the ranks as word had spread throughout Fort Harrison about the morning's extraordinary events. Elena stood at attention in her proper position, but the dynamics around her had shifted dramatically as her fellow recruits struggled to reconcile their previous assumptions with the reality of what they had witnessed. Colonel Martinez approached the formation with Kellerman at his side, both men wearing expressions that suggested they were about to address circumstances beyond the scope of normal training operations. The assembled recruits maintained military bearing, but their attention was focused entirely on the woman they had known as Deadweight Voss. At ease, Colonel Martinez commanded, his voice carrying across the formation with the authority of someone who had spent considerable time deciding how to handle an unprecedented situation. This afternoon, we address events that have significant implications for every member of this training program. Elena felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her as the colonel continued his remarks. The demonstration you witnessed this morning was not a miraculous improvement in marksmanship skills, but rather the controlled revelation of capabilities that have been deliberately concealed for operational purposes. Chun stood 3 positions to Elena's left, his face displaying the particular distress of someone whose understanding of social hierarchy had been completely overturned. The betting pool that had seemed like harmless entertainment now appeared to have been based on fundamentally false assumptions about human capabilities and character assessment. Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes has been operating under classified orders as part of a Pentagon program designed to identify vulnerabilities in our training and evaluation systems, the colonel announced. Her performance over the past months was a carefully constructed operation, not a reflection of actual skill limitations. The ripple of understanding that moved through the formation was almost visible as individual recruits processed the implications of this revelation. Every mocking comment, every dismissive gesture, every assumption about her incompetence had been made while she possessed skills that exceeded those of their instructors. Torres felt her face burning with embarrassment as she remembered the condescending advice she had offered to someone whose combat experience and specialized training far exceeded her own. The memory of calling Elena hopeless and suggesting she quit the military now seemed not just wrong, but professionally humiliating. Kellerman stepped forward, his weathered features showing the strain of someone whose professional judgment had been revealed as catastrophically flawed. In my assessment, this operation has identified critical weaknesses in how we evaluate personnel capabilities and make assumptions about individual potential based on limited observations. Morrison shifted uncomfortably as he recalled the dozens of times he had ridiculed Elena's performance, calling her deadweight and organizing group mockery sessions that now appear to have been directed at someone whose abilities exceeded those of everyone present, including the instructors. The colonel's voice continued with the measured tone of someone delivering information that would influence military careers and operational procedures. Staff Sergeant Reyes will be transitioning from her cover assignment to serve as a specialized instructor, bringing her expertise in advanced marksmanship and operational security to enhance our training programs. Elena maintained her military bearing as the announcement transformed her status from struggling recruit to recognized expert. But she could feel the psychological impact rippling through the formation as individual soldiers confronted the reality of how completely they had misjudged someone's capabilities. Hassan stepped slightly forward, his voice carrying the formal tone required for addressing superior officers in formation. "Colonel Martinez, sir, permission to speak on behalf of the unit regarding our interactions with Staff Sergeant Reyes during her undercover assignment." "Permission granted," the colonel replied, recognizing that the unusual circumstances required some form of formal acknowledgement from the recruits who had unknowingly participated in the operation. Hassan's words carried the weight of someone speaking for a group that had learned a profound lesson about assumptions and human assessment. "Sir, we respectfully acknowledge that our evaluation of Staff Sergeant Reyes was based on surface observations that failed to recognize her true capabilities, and we accept responsibility for allowing those assumptions to influence our professional interactions." The formal apology represented more than simple courtesy. It acknowledged that the entire unit had participated in a collective failure of perception that had important implications for their future careers as military leaders responsible for evaluating and developing other personnel. Colonel Martinez nodded with the satisfaction of someone who recognized that the educational objectives of the operation had been achieved, even though the specific circumstances had not been planned. The lessons learned from this experience will be incorporated into our training curriculum to help future military leaders avoid similar failures in personnel assessment. Elena felt the transformation in how her fellow recruits viewed her, but more importantly, she recognized that they were beginning to understand the broader implications about the dangers of superficial judgment and the importance of looking beyond initial appearances when evaluating human potential and capabilities. 3 weeks later, Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes stood at the instructor's podium overlooking the same range where she had once been dismissed as hopeless. The morning sun illuminated a very different scene as she prepared to conduct her first advanced marksmanship class for the same recruits who had once called her deadweight. Her instructor's uniform bore the distinctive markings of Specialized Training Command, and the respect in the eyes of her former tormentors represented a complete transformation of the social dynamics that had defined her months undercover. The betting pools and mockery had been replaced by eager attention and genuine desire to learn from someone whose capabilities they now understood. Chun approached her position with the formal bearing of someone who had learned profound lessons about assumptions and character assessment. "Staff Sergeant Reyes," he said with crisp military courtesy, "the unit is ready for instruction." Elena nodded with professional acknowledgement, but she could see in his eyes the memory of every mocking comment and dismissive gesture he had made during her time as the struggling recruit. The transformation wasn't just in how he addressed her, but in his understanding of how dangerous it could be to judge capabilities based on limited observations. "Today we begin advanced precision shooting techniques," Elena announced to the assembled class. "The fundamentals you'll learn here apply not just to marksmanship, but to the critical importance of accurate assessment in all military operations." Torres raised her hand with the respectful attention of someone who had learned to value expertise regardless of its source. "Staff Sergeant, how do we avoid making the same evaluation mistakes that we made during your undercover assessment?" Elena smiled slightly, recognizing that the educational objectives of Operation Silent Thunder were being achieved even though the specific circumstances had evolved beyond the original mission parameters. The answer lies in understanding that human capabilities often exist beneath surface presentations, and that effective military leadership requires looking beyond initial impressions. Kellerman had requested permission to observe the class, his presence representing his own journey from dismissive authority figure to someone genuinely interested in learning from the person he had once considered the worst recruit in his career. His notebook was filled with observations about training methodology rather than criticism. The lesson progressed, with Elena demonstrating techniques that had been developed through years of classified operations, each explanation revealing layers of knowledge and experience that contextualized her previous perfect performance. The recruits absorbed the instruction with the intensity of people who understood they were receiving training from someone whose expertise had been proven under the most demanding conditions. Morrison approached during a break, his voice carrying the humility of someone who had confronted his own failures in human assessment. "Staff Sergeant, I want to apologize for the disrespect we showed during your undercover assignment. We let our assumptions override our military professionalism." Elena accepted his apology with the grace of someone who understood that the learning experience had value beyond the immediate circumstances. "Your reactions were exactly what the operation was designed to reveal. The important thing is that you've learned to question your assumptions about human capabilities." As the class concluded, Hassan remained behind to ask questions that revealed his growing understanding of the broader implications. "Staff Sergeant, will the lessons from this operation influence how we evaluate personnel throughout our military careers?" Elena gathered her equipment with movements that now displayed the fluid professionalism that had been hidden for months. "The goal is that you'll remember this experience whenever you're tempted to dismiss someone based on limited observations. Human potential often exists beneath surface presentations, and effective leadership requires recognizing capabilities that might not be immediately obvious." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the range as the recruits dispersed. Their conversations focused on the technical aspects of precision shooting rather than the mockery that had once defined their interactions. The transformation was complete, but more importantly, the lessons learned would influence how they approach personnel evaluation throughout their military careers. Colonel Martinez observed from the command tower, satisfied that Operation Silent Thunder had achieved objectives that extended far beyond its original scope. The woman who had once been called useless had not only revealed critical vulnerabilities in training systems, but had also provided a generation of military leaders with profound insights about the dangers of superficial judgment. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength when others underestimated their capabilities. Elena Reyes had successfully transitioned from undercover operative to respected instructor, but her greatest achievement was the lasting impact on military personnel who would carry these lessons forward, creating a more thoughtful and effective approach to human assessment that would benefit the entire organization for years to come.